problem.
Hello, Todd. This is Nicole from the Helvetica base from far, far away Switzerland. I myself have loved Star Wars ever since I've been a little girl, and it made me curious, what was Carrie's favorite movie when she was small?
That's a good question. I remember, well, one in particular, we used to have, well, let me back up on this. So the question was, what was Carrie's favorite movie? And I'd have to explain that when we were young, we had a projection room, which was unusual, obviously in those days, to have a legitimate theater in your house. But my mother had this built in the early 60s. And so Carrie and I were, pretty young when we were now being brought up on classic movies. My mother was making us, I say that literally making us watch certain classic films once a week. And then we could pick a film that we could have brought in on the weekends and our friends could watch that. So we would be watching a lot of classic movies. This is like Debbie classic movies before Turner classic movies that we were being brought up on. So Carrie and I were raised on classic films, and my sister loved, and me too, right up to the end. If you walked into Carrie's room at any time, Turner Classics movies would be on, Betty Davis or Now Voyager or some classic film, Cary Grant, Philadelphia Story, some classic film would be on. Carrie loved those people. She loved Cary Grant. So we loved the films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington or The Magnificent Ambersons or Citizen Kane or all these classic films, and we grew up on them. So it wouldn't be, and this is, we're talking about at the younger age, and it continued. We never gave up on that. Obviously, a lot of movies were made that were fantastic over the decades, and we certainly had our favorite of more contemporary films. One of our favorite comedies was a movie with Peter Sellers called Being There. And that was the most witty comedy film that I have ever seen. We loved that movie, and we used to watch it a lot. So I would just say that a typical thing, if you would have asked Carrie this question, it would not have been a contemporary film. She would have brought up a classic, and she would have blown your mind. I could get pretty obscure here, but I don't want to do that to you. But suffice to say that, we knew Betty Davis when we were growing up, was a friend of our mom's. We met a lot of these stars. We had a great appreciation for these classic films. When Carrie wrote the film, These Old Broads, and we turned it into a television series, we worked back on the MGM lot where Carrie and I had grown up. And, we just had an appreciation for the history of film and the classic films in particular. And we always went back to that. Literally the last time I saw Carrie, we were sitting on her bed with Turner Classic Movies on. So, that's where we were coming from.
That's great. It sounds like it was such an amazing connection for you guys too.
Oh, for sure. And nothing had to be said either. Carrie, a lot of people would talk Carrie's ear off, but, she also just liked to relax like everybody. So that was what was great about these movies. You could go into Carrie's bedroom. She might be writing. She wrote longhand, by the way, on a legal pad, and she would write a lot, but she would keep on in the background the Turner Classic Movies films, and she would continue writing. And if you were hanging out with her, generally you'd be sitting at her bed. And I could tell you a lot of her friends experienced this, a lot of her friends, and they would all tell you this story. That was the place to hang with Carrie. You'd be in this great bed with a nice big TV, with a bowl of popcorn and a Coca-Cola.
Hello, ako si Nina ng Bagong Pag-asa Base Philippines. Naging masayang bahagi ng aking kabataan at sa maraming batang babae si Princess Leia at ang mga laruan na base sa kanya. Ano yung reaction ni Carrie sa mga to at kinokolekta ba din niya yung mga Princess Leia dolls?
Well, Carrie was sent prototypes and actually many of the toys. And so a lot, but she didn't really think much of it. They would get thrown in a box or a garage, or many of them ended up in storage at my ranch just because no one knew what to do with these prototype toys. And some actually went into being manufactured. But she was gratified in a sense at a certain point. I remember her telling stories about how when the Pez dispenser came out, she thought that was pretty amazing that she had become a Pez dispenser, and that, when her daughter was born, that her daughter could actually pull her head back and pull a wafer out of her throat. She saw, can actually say that they have that experience. So there was an aspect of the merchandising that intrigued her, but I don't think that she ever really understood it. She liked, like behind me right now, if you can go to the wider shot, John, like, do you have the shot with C-3PO? So I've got with me right now, like that's Carrie's C-3PO, and I've got an R2 here. And she used to like these toys. And she used to like saying, well, I don't go anywhere without my droids and stuff. So a lot of this stuff, though, was thrown into storage. And she had a few of these little things around her house, like out in her yard, strategically placed. So I think she understood some of the magic of it, but not to the degree the general public did. It's not like you would fully understand that, because literally the toys themselves, many of which are in the original packaging, were just ended up in storage, or she would give them away. When she passed away, at her front gate, people left piles of things. It was very, very touching. Everything from the lightsaber toys, on down. I had to actually go out and buy one of these because Carrie didn't have one, and I was asked to come to one of your guys' events, and I didn't even have a lightsaber. How pathetic is that? And which means that Carrie had one. In fact, we found one in storage at the ranch. It had been just thrown in the box. So it was an interesting journey, and you don't fully understand these things as they're happening. You only understand them from perspective from years later. I think it would be fun to talk to Carrie about this now, looking at what's happened and what everybody has felt when she left the earth, but also, the way people have responded to the toys and to the artifacts and the collectibles. I've got her little blaster here and some of her other artifacts. And I mean, I see how important they are now, but I didn't even get it at the time. Behind me is her director's chair from Revenge of the Jedi, which it was called at the time when they were making that film. And so I understand the collectibles. My mother was the one who saved everything. You probably know my mother was the great Hollywood preserver. And so fortunately, she ran around behind Carrie and sent everything up to the ranch or sent it to Vegas to be stored. So much of our history was preserved because of my mother. Carrie would have just thrown it all away, not understanding that it would be relevant now. At the time, not relevant at all. Now she would dig it. But back then, we didn't know what it was. Only my mother knew. So she was smart enough to store it for us. And fortunately, we have some cool stuff now.
Hi Todd, this is Lou from Jacques Post in Luxembourg. Carrie had many different faces. She was an actress, a writer, entertainer, philanthropist, a mother. Which role did she find herself the most comfortable with? Thank you.
I think Carrie was most comfortable being a writer, especially when she, there was a struggle with the bipolar disorder, so the medication could interfere with her writing. But when she was clear and writing, I think she was the happiest. She was prolific. I mean, it poured out of her. I have just pages of streaming consciousness written by her, just pages and pages, and it's all brilliant stuff. I just think that she was uncomfortable in life until she found the writing gift and excelled at it. She was uncomfortable because she was in a competition trying to be Debbie Reynolds, the next Debbie Reynolds, or the daughter of Debbie Reynolds. That was uncomfortable for her. It was a struggle for her, but she gave up on that when she found her own self in writing. She was never going to be as funny or as talented as my mother in her mind, in the traditional arts. But in writing, of course, she blew everybody away. I mean, my mother was a decent writer, but not in Carrie's league at all. Not at all. But Carrie excelled in that. And as you know, a lot of you know, she was a ghostwriter or a polished writer and wrote in literally hundreds of movies that you've seen and enjoyed that don't even have credit to her. You talk to any top director, you talk to Meryl Streep, you'll find that she was the one behind polishing those scripts up to make them what they were.
Hi, Todd.
We'd love to hear your fondest memory of Carrie.
Oh, it's endless. I mean, we had a very privileged life. I mean, Carrie used to say to my mother later on in life, that she had an unhappy childhood. And my mother would be like, you need to talk to your brother because like he doesn't think so. In fact, I have films, she would say, and Carrie and her used to go at it about this idea that she had a happy or unhappy childhood. And so the reality is we had this amazing privileged life, and it is well documented both in still pictures and in film. And I mean, we had giraffes and elephants brought to our parties, and I mean, just endless things that were around us. But also, most importantly, and amongst all of that, we had great love. We had a very tight family. My mother was an awesome mother that in the midst of great adversity of her own, but also a huge career, was able to really impart great love and great values to my sister and I. So to me, the greatest things that we did together generally, revolved around just life stuff. I could go back to us making movies together. We made a film together when we were kids, like 10, 11 years old. We used to make movies, our own movies. They of course they were lacking in storyline at times, but making those films together with our friends, I have those films. They're magical. Those were so much fun to do. Later it became a job, but back then it was just all for fun. We used to go and dig into my mother's costume collection and take out, she'd put on a Marilyn Monroe dress or something. And what a nightmare, when you think about what we were doing. But I have to admit, it was a lot of fun to get dressed up as all these stars in their costumes. I mean, who could wear Betty Grable or Marilyn Monroe's outfit? You had to be a teenager to fit into it, first of all. But there was Carrie in those costumes, and I'd have on Gene Kelly's outfit or whatever. So there was just a lot of magic growing up in this house. We had a house in Beverly Hills. I call it, the address was 813 Greenway Drive. Carrie and I wrote a screenplay together about life at 813 Greenway Drive. It was a coming of age story. We will eventually turn this into a series based around my book to expand on it. But it was a privileged, magical kingdom like Xanadu. And it was quite something to grow up there. And it was a nonstop non-reality. We lived in a magical kingdom that wasn't real. And the air didn't get blown out of it until Harry Carl and my mother broke up, and all of a sudden the house was gone and we woke up and we were teenagers, and the end of the innocence arrived. But before that, we lived in this magical kingdom that was a fanciful place that didn't really exist, but we didn't know that. We were so well insulated. So it was endless fun and games. I mean, who wouldn't want to go to a party, with Betty Davis and Groucho Marx and you name it, so many of the big stars, Jimmy Stewart, it was surreal. And later on in life, Carrie recreated that world up in her Coldwater house and began to put on those same parties again, and did her best to recreate the magic that my mother had begun back so many years before.
Hi Todd, so my question is, what was Carrie's reaction when she saw the fans' reaction to the movie?
Okay, so that's, I started to tell that story. Carrie and I were standing in the courtyard of Grauman's Chinese Theater, sort of in the corner by the front door, and we were looking back at these people camping out on Hollywood Boulevard. And we were like, what are we looking at? We had never seen, and we had grown up in Hollywood. We had grown up going to movies at that magical theater. I mean, this is now called the TCL Chinese Grauman's Theater, but it's still the Grauman's Chinese Theater right there in Hollywood Boulevard. And it was like, we had grown up going to movies there. The premiere of Singing in the Rain takes place there, and onward and onward. We went to so many things there. But we never saw an audience reaction like this. Never. It was mystifying. You were looking at something completely unique. It had rewritten the enthusiasm of the fans to such a degree that they're sleeping in sleeping bags and tents. So we were both just dumbfounded by that. I mean, I can assure you that no one had seen anything like that before. Not in this country. I don't know what goes on everywhere else in the world, but no one had seen that. And Carrie certainly had not. And we were shocked. But at the same time, you're like, wow, I'm part of that, she says. I'm part of that magic. And I was like, Yep, that's right.